sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, so John Bolton, right? Trump's national security advisor. Yeah, well, he became a pretty vocal critic of Trump. And today we're not going to get into all that political stuff.
Right.
But we're going to look into this really fascinating story. There's this CBS News article, and it talks about Secret Service protection and international intrigue and some crazy power plays. Like, seriously, this is a wild one.
Yeah, this whole thing, it really kind of shines a light on this process that's usually, pretty straightforward. Like former national security advisors, they often get extended protection.
Oh, right. Yeah, because of all the sensitive information.
Exactly. I mean, they know a lot, right? So that makes them potential targets.
So what exactly happened here?
Well, on Trump's very first day back, like literally day one, back in office for his second term, he revoked John Bolton's Secret Service protection.
Wait, hold on. Seriously, that's not standard at all, right? Especially with all the, threats Bolton's been getting from Iran. This is some serious stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's serious. And we got to remember, Bolton played a major role in that whole thing with the Trump administration's decision to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, back in 2020.
Right.
And Iran, they saw that as like an act of war. So Bolton's been a target ever since.
And it's not just talk, right? I mean, there was that whole thing with a member of, wasn't it the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? Didn't they get charged with plotting to kill Bolton?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In 2022, this guy, Shahrampur Safi, he was charged with trying to murder Bolton right here on U.S. soil. And get this, the FBI, they put a $300,000 reward for info leading to his capture.
Wow.
Yeah. And later on, the Biden administration, they upped that reward to $20 million. So that tells you how seriously they're taking this.
So we've got this really serious threat against Bolton, but the Biden administration, they actually granted him protection back in December of 2021, right? Even though they disagreed with him on a lot of things. But then Trump revokes it as soon as he's back in office. It just feels, kind of pointed, don't you think?
Well, it definitely raises some questions, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at Bolton's response, he said he's disappointed but not surprised. And he even, compares this decision to Biden's choice to give him protection despite their disagreements.
So it's almost like he's trying to highlight the difference between how the two presidents handle things.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about what else Trump did that first day back. He also started, revoking security clearances for intelligence officials who had spoken out about the Hunter Biden laptop story back during the 2020 election.
Oh, yeah. Those were the officials who signed that letter, right? Questioning whether the laptop was Russian disinformation.
Exactly. Seasoned professionals just doing their jobs, and now they're being targeted.
So it's is national security even a priority here, or is this just all about politics?
Yeah, it's a valid concern for sure. And remember, protecting people like Bolton and these other former officials, that's not cheap. We're talking taxpayer money here.
So how much are we talking about?
Well, for Bolton and another former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, it cost taxpayers over $12 million to protect them for almost a year.
$12 million. Wow. That's a lot of money. I mean, with that kind of price tag, shouldn't these decisions be based on real threats and not, personal grudges or political games?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's one we're going to dive into more as we keep going here. Because this story, it's not just about John Bolton. It's about how power is used and the consequences when things get personal and how all of that can affect our national security. To really understand how serious this is, I think we need to zoom out a bit. Look at the whole U.S.-Iran relationship.
Yeah, there's a lot of history there, right? Decades of tension. But it feels like things really went downhill during Trump's first term.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you think about him pulling the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal and then the assassination of Soleimani. Those were huge moments.
And Bolton was right there in the middle of it all, wasn't he? Pushing for that tough stance against Iran.
Yeah, definitely. He was like a driving force behind Trump's Iran policy, which a lot of people, even some Republicans, thought was way too aggressive.
So, when Trump decided to go after Soleimani, that was a big gamble. And clearly, it put a huge target on Bolton's back.
A target that Iran is serious about. They've openly talked about revenge. And they have a track record of going after their enemies, even overseas.
It's like that, what was it, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie? I was just reading about that. A religious decree basically calling for his death. Kind of scary stuff.
It is. And it shows you that this threat against Bolton, It's not something to be taken lightly. That's why the Biden administration, even though they didn't see eye to eye with Bolton on a lot of things, they decided the threat was real enough to give him protection. They put national security ahead of their differences.
Which just makes Trump's decision to take that protection away all the more interesting. It really shows how differently they approach these things.
For sure. And it makes you wonder, what kind of message does that send? What happens when presidents start making these security decisions based on who they like or dislike?
It feels like it could set a bad precedent.
It could. Imagine if officials are afraid to speak their minds or do their jobs because they're worried they might lose their protection down the road.
That doesn't sound good. For anyone.
Not at all. It creates this distrust, this fear. It weakens the government.
We've talked about how much it costs to protect someone like Bolton, but what about the other side? What if we don't protect him and something happens? Wouldn't that be a huge failure?
You're right. That's a big question. And it's something that often gets overlooked. We focus on the cost of protection, but what about the cost of not protecting someone? If something were to happen, that's a whole other level of cost.
You can't really put a price on that kind of failure. And it's not just about the person either.
No, absolutely not. Think about what it would mean internationally. An attack on a former U.S. official here in America, that would be a major incident. It could escalate things, lead to retaliation. Who knows what the consequences would be?
So this whole situation with Bolton, it goes way beyond just one guy and his security, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like a smaller version of these much bigger issues. It's about power, about personal agendas, and how they affect national security.
Hey, we can't forget those intelligence officials who spoke up about the Hunter Biden laptop. It seems like there's a pattern here.
Yeah, you're right. Trump took away their security clearances on the same day he revoked Bolton's protection. It's hard not to see the connection.
It's like he's going after anyone who questioned him or his people.
It's worrying, isn't it? It points to this broader trend of polarization and distrust. It's getting harder to tell the difference between real national security concerns and, just personal or political attacks.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It leaves us with some really important things to think about. Like, how do we as a country define and protect our national security when everything's so divided? How do we make sure personal loyalty doesn't get in the way of what's best for the country? And what's the price we pay when personal politics start to affect national security?
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. And those aren't just theoretical questions either. They have real-world implications.
You're right. And that's why it's so important to understand all the angles of this, to see how things connect even when they seem totally different. We need to have these tough conversations about where the line is between politics and national security.
Okay, I feel like we've covered a lot here. We talked about the threat to Bolton, the history between the U.S. and Iran, the cost of protection, and the potential consequences of making national security decisions based on politics. What else should we be thinking about?
Well, I think it's important to remember this isn't just about Trump. This is about the system that makes it possible for things like this to happen. The system gives the president a lot of power when it comes to national security.
Are you saying the system itself is part of the problem?
I think it's worth asking that question. We tend to focus on the people involved in these stories, but the structures and processes behind them are just as important. If a president can just decide to take away someone's security clearance or protection without anyone checking or stopping them, that's a system that can be abused.
That's a scary thought.
It is, but it's also an opportunity to look at these systems, to see how we can make them stronger. How can we make sure that national security decisions are based on facts and expertise, not on personal feelings or political calculations?
That sounds like a whole other deep dive.
Maybe it is, but it's a question we need to ask, and it's one that affects us all.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've gone over a lot in this deep dive, and we've raised some really important questions. All right, so we spent some time talking about John Bolton, former national security advisor, big threats from Iran, and how he ended up losing his protection. We also dug into that whole U.S.-Iran history thing and, the cost of all that security and how political stuff is getting mixed up with national security, kind of a worrying trend.
Yeah, for sure. And let's not forget about those intelligence officials, the ones who questioned the whole Hunter Biden laptop story, lost their security clearances the same day Bolton lost his protection. It's not a good look.
It's pretty messed up, honestly. So where does all this leave us? What are the big takeaways here?
It really comes down to a big question for everyone listening. How much do you think personal stuff and political differences should matter when we're talking about security and protection? especially when it involves, national security.
That's a tough one. Like, you don't want to just let someone off the hook because of their old job, but what if their life is actually in danger?
Exactly. It's like walking a tightrope. And if we fall, the consequences are huge, not just for that person, but for the whole country.
So what kind of consequences are we talking about?
Okay, imagine this. Someone who used to have a high-level position. They're afraid to speak out against the government because they think they'll lose their protection. Or what if people who are qualified to serve, they just don't want to because they're worried about becoming targets?
It's like nobody would want to speak up or work for the government if they thought they might get hurt or lose their job.
Exactly. It just creates all this distrust. People lose faith in the system, it hurts our national security, and in the end, it weakens our democracy.
This whole Bolton situation, it's really opened my eyes. This goes way beyond just one guy and his bodyguards.
Oh, for sure. It's like a symptom of something bigger. We got to pay attention to this stuff. This erosion of, norms, how national security is becoming more and more political. We got to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the future? And how do we make sure national security stays the top priority? How do we keep it separate from personal or political agendas?
This has given me a lot to think about. I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
And that's kind of the whole point, right? We're not here to give you all the answers. We just want to give you the info you need to decide for yourself. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep having those tough conversations. The future of our democracy might depend on it.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll.